So I think we are live. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, everyone out there. Thank you for tuning in to the NFL DFS Strategy Show, Osmo.com. Week 13 final thoughts presented by our lovely sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Chris Randone, Zal Vetri. Did I get that right again, Sal?
Yeah, you got it.
Yes, there we go. See, we're starting to show off right. That's what I'm talking about. How we doing, man? How was your Thanksgiving?
Yeah, Thanksgiving was good. We were just chatting earlier. I pretty much it was a 12-hour drive on Wednesday and yesterday, but sandwiched in between was Thanksgiving. Very good day. Brought back the leftovers, so that's good. But yeah, man, this always happens this week. Like the main slate for NFL is always pushed off until Friday or Saturday, and then people scramble to kind of figure out what's going on because of that roadblock of Thanksgiving.
We have a nice slate, man. There's a lot of 1 o'clock games. I haven't, really immersed myself in this slate like normal slates, but from what I've seen so far, there are a lot of great things going on with ownership. It's kind of like a spread out type of situation. There's really one guy that kind of stands out amongst the rest. But when you look at ownership for this week from the Osmo.com projections, uh, there's really just a lot of just in the teens, not really much in the 20s, one guy in the 30s. So kind of like an evil level balance field this week when it comes to ownership, which should be kind of fair when it comes to not having to worry about chalk. But, really you can just play a lot of great guys and you're not going to have to worry about people being so highly owned.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll definitely go through. I want to see what the ownership looks like today if we get an update, or definitely by tomorrow morning, and just see a couple of the injuries that happened throughout the week, like a Damian Williams, a Golden Tate, how that's reflected, and see how the market moves to it. Those are some interesting spots, at least I think so, to kind of try and see where we can get some lower owned players at.
Well, before we dive in, don't forget, guys, our wonderful sponsor at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. They're still doing the promo. Probably will continue to do the promo throughout the NFL season. But if you haven't signed up yet with the promo code AWESOME, and if you're eligible to play in your state, use that code. Sign up. You get $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, and that gets you 3 entries into that big NFL baller tournament that they hold every week. So, as some of our guys here at Osmo say, if you want to become a baller, you have an opportunity to do so at yahoo.com with their NFL baller tournament, guys. So don't forget, the promo code is Osmo. That's AWESEMO. All right. So before we start our normal type of thing, we're gonna go into the slate, guys. We're gonna do things a little bit different, kind of like what we did last week with top priorities and cash games and people who are doing a lot of entries and single entry. We're gonna go ahead and peel off some of that ownership first. And currently, right now, where we stand in DraftKings, Devontae Adams, Sal, 32.1%, clearly the highest owned guy out of anyone on this slate. Going up against the New York Giants. As we know, New York Giants secondary is always one to attack. They're on the road going into New York, the Green Bay Packers. But we saw last game from the Packers, Aaron Rodgers just got dismantled by a 49ers defense where we didn't really see that Aaron Rodgers that we're used to. He looked confused at times, wasn't very effective, scrambling and just not making plays. But is this the week that it's a bounce back week for the Packers and Devontae Adams in this passing offense?
Yeah, definitely interested to see what this will look like ownership wise on an update, but I don't really care where the ownership comes in at this point. I haven't projected right now Adams as my highest projected wide receiver, and he's the fourth most expensive. 7K is just too cheap. The industry knows it, but whatever you get here is it could be Janoris Jenkins, who's been good as of late, but has not faced somebody like Adams, and then everybody else in the field and in that secondary has been pretty garbage. Giants pass rush ranks right now bottom 5 in the league, so Rodgers should have all time to throw. You're getting Adams, who is an elite wide receiver, in my opinion, with an elite quarterback in a fantastic matchup, and he is cheap, affordable, with a good game total. So it's a spot that you just don't fade it. You can obviously not have 100%, but if you're trying to get 0% and fading it for the sake of fading, it's exactly why you don't. It's a really good player in a really good spot. So yeah, he's too cheap, and he's probably going to be my highest or top 2 owned wide receiver.
Can you tell me why Devontae Adams, so he's so highly owned, but then when you look at the person who's going to be throwing to him in Aaron Rodgers, he's 6,500 on DraftKings, he's nowhere to be found in ownership. And so if the idea is that Devontae Adams is going to have a breakout game, he's going to be producing, well, that means that Aaron Rodgers is going to have a breakout game, going to be producing because he's going to be throwing him the ball. So is this an interesting contrarian play with Aaron Rodgers, considering that his ownership is nowhere to be found?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think there's some caveats to it. So the reason why you're not seeing a lot of Rodgers ownership is Adams is probably the only reason Rodgers has any ownership right now in sort of just wide receiver quarterback pairings. But there's nothing else in the Packers that screams out, I want to stack MVS, who's not seeing snaps, Allen Lazard. Jamal Williams is cheaper. He's probably the next best option on the Packers at 4,500, but more times than not, you're seeing like 2 receptions, 3 receptions at best. So it's just not a quote unquote industry standards game stack or team stack of 3 players from the Packers. So I think it's just pulling down a lot of things. Price point, maybe after a bad game, you don't see a lot of Aaron Rodgers. 6.5-point home favorite doesn't favor a shootout as much. But yeah, I think, and I was discussing this earlier today actually with some people. I think that trying to get to more 3-man game stacks instead of your stereotypical 4, which correlate well, but when I'm trying to force in another player from the Packers here, it seems like I'm just building a bad lineup. So getting to Rodgers with Adams and running it back with, say, Saquon or Shepard, I'd much rather do that. Only have 3 players from the game. You don't have that 4-man game stack, but if you're trying to jam in Jamal Williams or Allen Lazard just for the sake of saying you have a 4-man game stack, you probably have a much worse lineup.
I like that call. Typically, I'm usually focused on 3-man stacks rather than 4, because you just need so much more to happen. And typically, in this type of scenario, like you just mentioned, Aaron Rodgers doesn't really have that many weapons to throw to. Devontae Adams is like a lock, his primary guy that he's always going to look for first on majority of these passing downs. Jamal Williams is someone interesting, and we'll get to him shortly because he is someone that is ranked high up on the list for this week. He's at 4,500. We can actually talk about him now. He's 17.6%, 4,500 on DK. How do you not look at that price point and say, wow, I mean, for a guy who has split opportunities in the backfield, who's involved in the passing game, it's hard not to kind of look at him and pass him up.
Yeah, so earlier in the week, he was like a guy who was standing out to me that I liked. Due to some of these injuries, you get more clear. It looks like there's going to be no Jordan Howard, so a little bit more expensive. But Sanders is in play once again. A guy like LaShawn McCoy becomes the lead back in a nice offense with the highest implied team total in a similar price range. So Jamal Williams has fallen off sort of priorities of interests. It's just really tough. He's in a running back by committee where even though last week he got 7 balls because they were trailing and he was just a guy they used in passing game script, and Aaron Jones has really not been schemed in the last 3 weeks and 3 games in that receiving game. So that helps Williams, but still only saw 49% of the touches or the snaps last week. He's a guy who is the second option in his running back by committee, and the price point's reflecting it now. And he is too cheap for the 12 touches he'll get in the game. But it's not something that, if this stays at 17%, if I had to guess, I would say it comes down maybe somewhere around like 12%, 10% by the time of lock, just due to these other running backs opening up. But at 17%, I would probably have less.
Another guy on the list, which we don't really need much to say because he's just that damn good, is Christian McCaffrey, 10.5K, 27.9%. Once again, he seems to thrive no matter what you throw at him. And now he's going to get a really good matchup against the Washington defense that can't stop the run at home. I mean, how do you not roster CMC here given this matchup and given that no matter what you throw at him, he's going to excel?
Yeah, he's going to excel whether his team scores no touchdowns or he gets 2 last week. Yeah, the 28% we have him at right now, I'm fine getting to 30 or a little bit more. We saw the last 2 weeks, though, he hasn't been needed. And this week, it's really a drastic price difference between McCaffrey and the next most expensive. I mean, you're looking at a almost $3,000 price off and drop down to Nick Chubb's and Derrick Henry's, where not a lot of people have interest in those guys based on ownership. So like the next guy who's garnering ownership is $3,000 plus less expensive than McCaffrey. So I do think this is a week where we can start to talk like we did with Michael Thomas when he was on the main slates the last few weeks, where there's a lot of opportunity costs now. Like the next best options at running back, they can still put up 25 plus points, whether it's Saquon or Le'Veon Bell, these types of players, and they're $3,000 cheaper. So yeah, McCaffrey around 30%, somewhere around there feels absolutely fine. You want to get more or less, just you have to prioritize your lineup through that. But I think that there's this big of a price difference. There's not a $9,000 Zeke like there was. You have a lot more opportunity and a lot more things to do with that money if you don't roster him.
There's a 2,700 price gap from McCaffrey to the next running back and Nick Chubb. So I guess what people might be thinking or wondering in their minds is, well, if I'm rostering McCaffrey, how do I go about the rest of my build in my lineup based on these price points for these running backs this week? Because few guys in the 7Ks, but then it's just everyone's in the 6s and the 5s. I mean, there's a lot of pass catching backs in the 5s. I mean, Austin Eckler is 5,700 at Denver, which We can talk about that a little bit later, but that's kind of interesting. Jalen Samuels, 5,700. If Connor is doubtful and he doesn't play, that's another interesting guy. Kareem Hunt still in that 5K price range, and he's getting a lot of looks and opportunities and touches as well. So taking a step back real quick, if you're rostering CMC, or let's just talk about the running back position in itself, uh, how do you think a build should go this week when looking at these price points and seeing McCaffrey all the way at the top?
Yeah, so if you're going to be taking sort of a McCaffrey in your lineup approach, then yeah, getting down to LaShawn McCoy, who's opened up a little bit more, seems to be a nice play. The Philip Lindsay's in that low 5K range. That's probably a nice pairing option. Miles Sanders at 54 versus Miami hasn't been doing much on the ground all season long, so I'm a little bit skeptical of that with the price point coming up. But those are the options you have, and you're probably more susceptible to having to punt tight end. You have a lot of good tight ends on this slate, but you're probably more susceptible to having to get to the 3K or 4K range instead of paying for your Wallers or your Kelseys or Kittles of the world if you're playing McCaffrey. And right now, I actually lean, I'm going to have McCaffrey, like 30% is fine, but I think I lean that the optimal might be without him. Like we've seen the last 2 weeks, he can score 30 plus and not be needed because somebody else can just score 25 and push him out of it. It's a lot less options than like at a wide receiver position, but I like the mid range a lot this week of the Le'Veon Bells not picking up a ton of ownership. Saquon, who's definitely playing injured, but 7,400 is worth a gamble versus the Packers, who've just been beaten up on the ground, and then Todd Gurley. So even Fournette, that mid K range is kind of like where I like to pair two guys this week. If you're not going to go to McCaffrey, it leaves you to a lot of nice builds where you can get a quality tight end and a couple of receivers that makes sense.
Last week we saw Henry, Fournette, Nick Chubb. I mean, these guys have pretty solid games, specifically the most in Derrick Henry. If you don't go CMC, which one would be this top? Which one would be your like? I guess we could say middle tier because Christian McCaffrey's price so high. So out of these 7K range guys, let's say you're doing single entry. Which one would you rate the highest amongst all of them?
Yeah, so for me, I'd probably rank Le'Veon Bell the highest at 7,200 versus the Bengals.
Okay. Leonard Fournette, he's in that 7K range, 7,500. Gonna be at home against Tampa, where really you don't run anyone against that Tampa Bay run defense, one of the best in the league, 26.7%. I don't know how I feel about this, man. I mean, I know he's gonna get volume, but he's not CMC, and I'm kind of interested to hear what you have to say on your take with this matchup and the ownership, and because I just don't know if he can excel against how really good this Tampa Bay front four is.
Yeah, the Tampa Bay front's great. They're dealing with the only guy who's really injured right now is Jason Pierre-Paul, but it seems like he'll suit up. So it's going to be a healthy defensive line that has been stout. And yeah, you still have a fair price point on Fournette. It's kind of dynamically priced a little bit down because of the matchup. I have interest in him. He's sort of a secondary interest right now in that range behind Saquon's, behind Le'Veon Bell for me. It's just you hit the nail on the head. On the ground, it's a tough spot for him. This is a game where if you are Jacksonville, you go through Nick Foles, who has not looked good since returning, but you go against this really bad secondary, a pass funnel secondary, and you just get to in at least DFS, your Conleys, your Sharks, and your DD Westbrooks. The good thing for Fournette is he's second in the league in opportunities behind McCaffrey, so he's going to average right now close to 7 targets per game. So if you do get 5 receptions out of him, he can keep himself afloat at that price point. So he's without a doubt in play. Also has all of the red zone work in the world here. It's just really rough, and it's a spot where you can see 20 carries on the ground for 60 something yards. It's just really you're relying on touchdowns in his passing game role, which is definitely there. So he's definitely in play.
If not for Net, could you pivot or would you want to pivot to say Saquon Barkley, who's $100 cheaper, a little bit less owned? Josh Jacobs, he's 6,900, and then your boy Le'Veon Bell. I mean, he's almost sub 10% at 7,200. So there's a lot of great pivots here and great matchups for those pivots if you're not looking towards Fournette.
Yeah, I agree. I think those two. So in the 7K range, I think Barkley and Bell are the main guys for me. I know you have Nick Chubb there in a really tough matchup and kind of losing, or last week getting it back a little bit at the passing game role, but definitely still losing snaps in the passing game role to Kareem Hunt, or at least opportunities. And then Derrick Henry priced all the way up now in a tougher matchup. Not a spot I really want to get to after coming off of big games for him. So Saquon and Bell. Saquon, yeah, he's definitely playing injured. There's issues there. They're not dumping it off as much, which is a concern. 19 and a half team favor or team implied total here, and they're touchdown underdog. So none of that really is nice. You're just banking on the talent at the price point. And then also, I've heard concerns about the weather in the Giants game versus Green Bay. We'll see how that turns out. But for the most part, it probably helps Saquon. It helps a lot of the guys in that game that I have interest in anyways, short passing to Shepard, short passing, and just running to Saquon. So The environment is not great for Barkley, but you're just betting on talent at the low price point or lower relative to where he usually is. And then the guy that I discussed earlier, just Le'Veon Bell. Over the last month since talking to Adam Gase about his role in the offense, he's averaging 22 touches per game, not even just opportunities, touches. So the upside for Le'Veon Bell at 7,200 to have 25 touches against an improving because they're getting healthier Cincinnati defense, but nowhere near good because they're still hurt and just bad players on it. Le'Veon Bell at 25 touches, somewhere around there. I have him projected for 23 in this game. It's really hard to ignore at 7,200, and he's getting all the red zone work.
The Jaguars passing offense, some of those wide receivers are up there, but Nick Foles is nowhere to be found in ownership. So when we do get there, I think Nick Foles could be one of those sleepers that could be interesting if this game is a game where they rely heavily on the passing offense. Haven't really seen much out of him these first 2 games back, but I don't mind it against a very weak Tampa Bay secondary that really anyone has had the ability to throw on. Christian Kirk, 5,700 at home against the Rams, 21.6%. This I'm kind of confused about why he's so high up there. I think there's other guys that I like way before Kirk. What's your take on it?
Yeah, so Kyler Murray popped up late in the week with the I believe yesterday with his hamstring questionable to play. So obviously if he doesn't play and something happens there, you're gonna have a huge drop off and you're probably not gonna have all that much of really any Christian Kirk ownership. I think it'll drop down from what we're seeing. But yeah, the price tag is where it probably should be at this point, 5,700. He's running most of his routes out wide now, so that's actually not good for him. Jalen Ramsey has not been that great this year, but still an above average, well above average cornerback. So he'll see a lot of Jalen Ramsey this week because they've been using Kirk on the outside more. And in the slot, he'll see a good amount of Robbie Coleman. So not a really great matchup for him. Overall, the safeties and the back end of that secondary for the Rams has been bad. But it just doesn't suit up that well. And yeah, at 5,700, if you want to get to him, it's fine. But in terms of like getting over 1 out of every 4 of him in my lineups, it's not going to be an option for me. I think he's appropriately priced, and the matchup doesn't really scream it that much of an advantage.
Other guys in his same price area, I want to get your take on this real quick. So pivot or no pivot, but Devontae Parker against Christian Kirk, pivot or no pivot?
No pivot.
Jamison Crowder.
I would pivot.
McLaurin.
No pivot.
Tyler Boyd.
I would pivot there.
Robert Woods.
Yeah, I'd pivot.
Sammy Watkins.
Definitely pivot. I think that's a really good play this week.
And let me see, 5,300 Darius Slayton.
I would pivot.
Okay. So I mean, there's a lot of guys here. If you're, don't be so focused on Kirk, because I just don't know if Jalen Ramsey is going to be on him. Jalen Ramsey has been somewhat decent. This past game, they ran some weird routes where Hollywood Brown got open, and I know Ramsey was on him a couple of those plays throughout the game. So I don't want that to kind of discredit. He's been having a solid year to an extent. I mean, the Rams defense did change immensely when he came over, but I just find it very strange that there's like so much ownership flocking to Kirk. I mean, I get it, but I think there's other areas where you can miss out on potentially and save a little bit of money with other guys that get a lot of volume that are in great matchups. Rounding out DraftKings, Mike Evans, he's in the 19 percentile, 6,900. Going back to that Jacksonville game, he got outproduced by his boy last week in Godwin. So is this the week where they flip scripts again?
I mean, it's a tougher matchup this week for Evans against Boye. So the difference is DraftKings has just now priced them at a gap difference to where one of them is much more appealing. Like even in the tougher matchup, Evans can still win that. They saw the exact same amount of targets last week. They still get similar opportunities. It is just very weird that they keep popping off individually and not each of them having a big play in a game for a touchdown. I just think it's a product of like an 11 game small sample. But yeah, you had Godwin getting both of the touchdowns. Was not tackled, really bad tackling on the first one. Split the defenders, had a 71 yarder. So Evans still saw eight targets in that game. Still seeing more air yards. So now at an $800 price difference, I do prefer Evans. This is a week where though every single week it's who do you pick or do you just get both of them? This is a week where they're really not the priority options for me. If you do get to a Jacksonville stack, I would prefer running back Mike Evans just for salary savings and something right now they project out very similar for me, just for pure point.
Mike Evans, last 3 games hasn't found the end zone, hasn't had double-digit targets. But Jacksonville, Boye plays a lot of man. So, where my man thrives, Mike Evans is in that man coverage. So definitely a big, more physical type of player than Boye is. So I could see him winning a lot of those matchups. But I mean, that's a little difficult to really go there because I feel like there are other great options at that 6K price point that you could want to pivot. I think DJ Shark is a better play in that game rather than Mike Evans.
Yeah, I agree, and I think once we get an ownership run, we're going to see that Shark. I think just pops up really big. I think you see Kirk and definitely Mike Evans as a product of that just drop a little bit, but behind Devontae Adams, I think Shark is at least in that like 6K or above range, probably the next best option on the slate. He's just way too cheap. Like you have DJ Moore being priced up as he should be because he's been great over the last month from the 4K range to the high sixes. DJ Shark, who's been very solid and if not really good with at least solid quarterback play, just remains in this mid 6K range, and it's too cheap.
How do you feel about going to the other wideout and Chris Godwin with ownership not really being there for him because his price because of that price gap?
Yeah, he'll have the better matchup in the slot. It's just a spot where it's really hard, even at the ownership difference, to want to recommend like Devontae Adams for really chalky at $700 cheaper. I'm still going to take Adams. I'm still going to take DJ Shark. We'll see what the ownership comes up on Shark throughout the week. But yeah, I don't have much interest there. Just the $7,700 tag. I know that it could maybe be contrarian because he's a lower owned, but it's just a spot where I probably don't get to. I think he's priced to a point where I don't have to get there because of how good that 7K range is. And I'd rather spend that extra money getting up at running back.
FanDuel, pretty much the same guys at the top. However, though, Travis Kelce, highest tight end, comes in at 26.2%. He's 7,100. Going up against Oakland, great matchup for him at home. Is this worth justifying to go here at this price point?
Yeah, I think it is. It's a spot where even on DraftKings, I think it's justifiable. You have to prioritize yourself around it, which is the thing that makes it a little more difficult for me since there's so many good tight ends on this slate. So I don't prefer paying up for him, but at that ownership, I think it's fine. If you were to just to take away the tight end positionality and say that Kelsey was a wide receiver this week, he would look like an underpriced or a fairly priced receiver instead of a top end or an overpriced tight end. The only reason he seems really expensive is because when you click to the tight end page, nobody else is near him in pricing. But if he was on the wide receiver page, he'd be right next to, say, Devontae on cheaper than Devontae on FanDuel, Devontae on DraftKings, and you're looking at that and saying, well, yeah, that matchup makes sense for that price tag.
Saquon Barkley, he's next on that list at 7,600, 21.7%. You kind of mentioned him a little bit earlier. He's been a little bit banged up. They're not utilizing him in the same way that maybe we saw last year. Who knows if it's because of the whole Eli was quarterback, Odell was there, not that much attention on him. There's a lot of variables that you could throw into that bag, but he's got a pretty good matchup, man, against a Packers D that has really surrendered a lot to the running game. Is this the game that we kind of see old flashes of last year's Saquon?
So yeah, the matchup would allow for that to be happening a little bit more, but the only issues that he has is he's without a doubt, if I had to assume, just playing banged up, playing injured here, not fully healthy is what he's stated a couple of times already, but not going to be shut down because that's just not the guy he is. So you're getting a banged up Saquon, and it has not looked good, but you're judging it since they had a buy off of the last two games that have not looked great, but now he has a much better matchup. There's no Evan Ingram, there's no Golden Tate, so opportunities in the passing game, which they haven't been dumping it off for some odd reason, should be there more so. Yeah, I think it's fine on FanDuel at the ownership. Again, I'd rather prefer Le'Veon Bell on both sites a little bit more, but I will have interest in Saquon. That mid range or that upper mid range at running back is appealing to me. And yeah, you're betting on talent there, and you're just trying to look past the 2 week sample, weigh in the injury a little bit, but just know that this is a guy who he can get it done at that price tag, and he's underpriced more times than not.
Do you think it's more of a risk to play him here? Would you rather play him knowing that he's not owned? But now, since he is highly owned and we really don't know what to expect from him, he's not that guaranteed type of play like CMC is per se. So, could you fade against the field in this situation?
Yeah, you definitely can. I'd probably be more reluctant to fade on FanDuel where he's coming in a little bit more highly owned, and just the positionality being a little bit better on DraftKings with the different pricing to get to him. So, yeah, I think since the ownership is there and this injury, you can definitely fade there. And that's another reason why just Bell at the lower ownership is standing out a little bit more.
Last guy that we'll speak about is Miles Sanders, 5,800. They're kind of almost in the same price points, both platforms, DK and FanDuel with Sanders this week in the 5K range. But going down to Miami, 20.5%. Hasn't really done much in the running game. If you're looking for production, I mean, it's going to be in that passing game primarily. So I don't know. I mean, Miles Sanders hasn't gotten to where a lot of people have wanted him to get to the last few weeks. Is this finally a time where he does rise to the occasion, or is this like a Saquon Barkley with the unknown? We can just go ahead and say, you know what, we can pivot elsewhere.
Honestly, yeah, it might not be a popular opinion, but I'd prefer just pivoting elsewhere here. So you don't have a ton of great running back options at value on the slate, but they're slowly popping up. LaShawn McCoy's down there. Philip Lindsay, once again, is down there. Now 7-week low price point of 5K. But Sanders' price continues to come up, even though he continues to do nothing. So you're paying for sort of the inefficiency and ineffectiveness of him. And what is the biggest part of his game, like you touched on? It's the receiving game role. Well, they're 9.5 point favorites. How often do they need Miles Sanders to be running wheel routes in this game? Probably not all that often. So if you kind of lower his projection in the receiving game and the price is coming up, I don't know how you feel comfortable with getting to him. He's averaging 4.4 yards per carry on the ground this season. Not great, probably average at best, maybe a little bit below average. And a lot of that came on one really long 65-yard touchdown. So he has not been great on the ground. And now Jay Ajayi, revenge narrative. No, I'm just kidding. But he's going to be coming in and probably soaking up a little bit more of the snaps. Maybe Sanders gets down to 70, 75%. Not as much needed in the passing game here. So yeah, with the price tag coming up, he's definitely in play. But he's a guy that I'm not going to just prioritize as like a top 2 or 3 on back. There's probably no Jordan Howard, doubtful, but it's a spot where I think the price is coming up and his skill set, if anything in this game, is going to be less needed.
All right. Well, that's it for ownership. Looking at those guys, top guys on both DraftKings and FanDuel. Let's go into some topics to cover for this week, kind of like what we did last week. Kind of switch it up, give people a little different side. But before we do, don't forget, if you haven't signed up for Osmo.com yet, you can use the promo code NFL Strategy. And here's the thing. If you haven't used the tools and resources yet, the projections, the boomer bust tools, the pay for articles behind the paywall, all these different things that the number one player in himself has created for us to utilize, and the things that he uses himself as well. Give it a try. Go to osmo.com/NFL, look at the videos, see what you get before you get involved. But you do get 50% off. It's a pretty good deal for just trying it out for 1 month. Promo code NFL Strategy. Don't forget. All right. So top priorities. We did this last time, cash game, multi-entry, and single entry. So who are your cash game priorities this week heading into this slate?
Yeah, so I'll approach it through positions. So going over to the quarterback position, I think that this week Nick Foles just makes a lot of sense as a priority in that space. And then depending on how you want to construct your lineups, Patrick Mahomes on the top end makes a lot of sense in the highest total game, probably ends up being the highest scorer on the slate. So if you have the money and you're just looking for overall upside in points, Mahomes stands out. If you're trying to save money at quarterback, guys like Nick Foles stand out. Kyler Murray, depending on his injury status, would stand out a little bit. Spots that you don't have to stack or worry about it, Jameis stands out as well. Going to running back, yeah, I mean, McCaffrey, if it's just the spot where you should be plugging him into most of your cash lineups and trying to go from there and see if it works out. And then on the lower end, opening up to and wanting to see exactly what the status is, but I imagine he'll be active, to LaShawn McCoy at 4,800 now if there's no Damian Williams. In the highest total game on the slate, you probably have last time that there was no LaShawn McCoy and Darrell and Damian were active, Damian outtouched Darrell Williams 24-3. So it's not like they're trying to give Darrell Williams more touches. I would imagine LaShawn McCoy sees 15 plus touches, if not 20 plus at that price tag, and a huge favorite. So those are guys that stand out at running back. Wide receiver, there's just so many options. I think Devontae screams out as sort of a cash must at that price point at $7,000, highest projected player. Going down, I think Tyler Boyd is interesting in that lower range of 5K. And then DJ Shark as well stands out. Tight end, depending on what you want to do, Darren Waller is probably the better pay up option. Zach Ertz being banged up, but either way, if Zach Ertz is in or out, I think Dallas Goedert makes for a nice play at 4,100.
All right. What about, you mentioned Nick Foles. And so I think, oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was thinking for a second about what you just said, but in the cash game, when it comes to, you said Nick Foles, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. When you look at the actual, I guess, price points, when you see Nick Foles, and then also you have guys like that are maybe in good spots like Carson Wentz, guys like Sam Darnold against Cincinnati. Could you go here, or is just Nick Foles the safe play? Because I guess what I want people to kind of figure out and understand is obviously a lot of people say, well, I'm going to start my cash game with this guy and then start building. And then that kind of leads to, people kind of playing against each other, probably with the same players. However, though, there's other guys in these price points that present similar matchups when it comes to good matchups, and guys who are going to throw the ball a lot. So do you mind maybe going to Darnold or maybe going to Wentz, regardless of kind of either how they performed in Wentz like the last couple weeks, or Darnold, who has kind of resurged, and who's someone who has been very effective the last 3 weeks in the passing game?
Yeah, I probably won't get to Darnold as much, just projection wise for me, and then the price being a little bit higher. But yeah, I think Wentz and Foles are probably interchangeable when it comes to cash. Foles stands out as just a better stacking option for tournaments, even though Wentz is slowly becoming more chalky as the week goes on. But I have them. They're $100 price difference on DraftKings, and I have Nick Foles for point 0.2 more fantasy points. So it's really a toss up there who you like more. At that point, I just take the guy who's $100 cheaper, and in the better matchup, at least for trying to throw more. You can see Wentz probably attempting 28, 30 passes, where Foles might attempt 40 in this one. And that opportunity is just going to be a little bit better, but they project out very similar for me. So, yeah, it's a toss up there. I like both of them. Probably slightly give it to Foles, but in cash, they're definitely both in play.
Do you think anyone will go to Dalton or Haskins?
So I don't know about Haskins, but I do think people are going to go to Dalton. I think it's very popular for people to want to. I have him marked as definitely in play for cash, but he probably falls down the list as like the fourth or fifth guy that I would start to consider. I'd consider that 5K Carson Wentz and Foles, and then probably Mahomes ahead of him. But yeah, I think he's definitely in play. The Jets outside cornerbacks and just secondary in general outside of Adams and Brian Poole in the slot has not been that great. So you have Dalton at 4,700 with pass catchers that make sense. He's definitely just a cash play for me because if Dalton goes for 15, 16 fantasy points at that price point in cash, it's fine for you. It doesn't do anything great, but it's definitely going to keep you afloat. But in a tournament, I just don't see Andy Dalton, even with a good matchup at this price tag, getting you to a 25 plus point performance. He does throw 42 times per game, the most on the slate, the most in the league, obviously skewed a little bit for sitting some games out. So there's upside there, but it's still Andy Dalton. So I think he's more of a cash play.
It's interesting because Dalton is 48, and then you have Auden Tate, who's 38. And I mean, you could really roll these two guys out and get like McCaffrey and just pay up in a lot of areas where, I mean, you're just really hoping for the best in this Bengals passing offense. But it is a heavy volume passing offense when Dalton is behind center. Next topic. Oh, well, excuse me. For multi entering, clearly it's a different type of build, but who do you like as far as a top priority when you're looking at maybe if you're doing three lineups, or if someone who's doing like $1.20 max, or even someone who maybe would be max in the millionaire maker? Who do you kind of are gravitating to right away, that are like must haves into your builds?
Yeah. So at quarterback,
I mean, you can go position by position if you want to, like last time.
yeah. So when it comes to multi entering, just similar. So really just looking for stacking options here, but I guess I'll go. I haven't ran just stacks for overall ownership, but similar to my cash lineups, I'll have those types of quarterbacks. But I do like, even though he's on the road, I do like Jared Goff and then also Aaron Rodgers, as we talked about earlier, as sort of more contrarian type plays. Maybe not those must have players. Those would still probably fall into like more of a Nick Foles or Patrick Mahomes type of range, but being up there as they're not in cash, guys like Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff. They both have clear passing options. Rodgers, we talked about earlier. You probably just don't want to force in a three-man stack there. Just get to Adams, run it back with somebody from the other team, and then build the rest of your lineup out. Goff has the options there. And then on the other side, you have guys like Christian Kirk that you could run it back with. So those are more tournament options. Goff being on the road is definitely worrisome, but fastest pace game on the slate. Very good matchup against Arizona, and a nice team total of 25 stands out as all positives.
What about Patrick Mahomes? You think people will put him as a priority given such the high run implied total that Vegas has given him over 30 points? I mean, obviously ownership is there right now, but could we see a lot of people paying up for Mahomes at QB?
Yeah, I think he'll just always garner ownership. Like average quarterback ownership is probably like around 8 to 10%. Mahomes is just always going to come in right around double that. So even at this price tag, I think people still go to it. He came in on a first run of ownership around 15% for Osmo here. So I think people will get there, and I do like him. Like especially in single entry or three maxes. Like Tyreek Hill is probably out of play in stacks. You can get there if you want, but I don't even want to get him in that. Even in stacks, I'll probably still go to Kelsey and Sammy Watkins as a KC stack just to get a little bit of price salary relief. But yeah, Mahomes at 7,400, I would probably bet more times than not he leads all quarterbacks in the slate. He comes in right around somewhere around 30 fantasy points, and then you just have to get the pieces of it right. So yeah, he's probably something that people will try and prioritize, and I will as well.
What about Lamar Jackson, man? Right now, I mean, he's projected sub 8%. Could be a very great leverage play. Obviously, he's going to have a very tough matchup, but that hasn't stopped him this year, really, when it comes to tough matchups. And he's going to be at home against this 49ers team. So Could you go here, or would you want to? I guess I could say in a style of multi-entering.
Yeah, I definitely want to go here, and you can go here. So we saw like the best defense that profiles out like San Fran is New England, like strong secondary, a solid front. San Fran's front is better, and they're both not the greatest at stopping the run. So it's a really good spot for Lamar. Where the only issue is this defensive line compared to the Patriots is much better. San Fran's probably the best defensive line in the league, and it's just going to be lockdown for his outside receivers. There's going to be no separation for the Willie Sneads of the world, Hollywood Browns. That's what the issue is, and you're really banking on the rushing upside. He ends up running in 2 touchdowns against the Patriots. So that's where you get the upside there at 7K. It's probably not something that I try and go out of my way to get. He's coming in at like 7% owned. If I got to 10 to 12% of him, I'd like it. And I'm probably just going to run him naked primarily. You have Mark Andrews priced up to 6,100 as the guy who would stand out the most. But again, a tough matchup in the secondary. I don't want to get to Hollywood Brown this week against whoever it might be. Had Witherspoon come back last week. He's been playing well. Richard Sherman at times on the left side of the field. So all the options for Baltimore look kind of gross. Doesn't stand out as it's the slowest paced game on the slate, so it doesn't stand out as a high scoring affair. So maybe one less possession in this game. Lots of things to not really want to prioritize Lamar, but yeah, if you get 10% of him, maybe a little bit more above the field, I think that's fine for a guy who continues to get it done, continues to average over 80 yards per game on the ground, on pace to break the rushing touch or the rushing yard record for a quarterback by like 200 yards. So yeah, Lamar at 7K is definitely in play.
I think one thing to take note, 49ers played the Cardinals twice this year. Cardinals lost by 3 the first game, and they were winning with 30 seconds left in that second game. But the big stat is Kyle Murray, right? Dual threat quarterback. Clearly not the same level of talent as Jackson. I think Jackson is far more superior, but similar style. And 4 touchdown passes against the 49ers this year, over 100 yards rushing against the 49ers. So I think one thing to take note here is maybe this is a 49ers defense that is solid, but isn't good against the dual threat quarterback, because obviously in these 2 games, Kyle Murray produced. He did. And so I think that's something to maybe give anyone confidence when looking at Lamar Jackson this week. Hollywood Brown, I'm not too sure I would go there. I think I would pivot maybe to Andrews. I feel like if you're not going to run him naked and you want to run him with someone, I think Andrews would be the guy to run him with. Or if you really want, maybe one of those other tight ends. But I think the safe bet of any of the or receiving core is Andrews in that matchup.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And yeah, it's like San Fran's as good of a defense as you'll see in New England, and they're going to have trouble with these types of quarterbacks because that's just what happens. Like if you have a talented quarterback who can avoid or be elusive in the backfield, it's going to work out. You've seen it obviously all the way back with Michael Vick, Kaepernick, Cam Newton before he gets hurt, and then right now you have Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson doing it. What you need at this price tag, and what probably a more difficult matchup in the secondary, is you need Lamar to score on the ground and have 80 plus rushing yards, which is what he's been averaging per game. So it's still a fine spot.
But how many times have we said this year that people are so scared of the matchup and they're focused on the defense, and that doesn't even matter. And then at the same time, we're focusing on like the high scoring games, the high over unders. And how many times have we been disappointed? I mean, I think people on Thanksgiving were very disappointed in this same situation where no one went to that early games as much as people went to that final game in that Falcons Saints game where all the ownership was, yet wasn't the game that was the right game of choosing of the 3. And I think that is translating to a lot of the times of what we've been seeing week after week is, don't be scared to roster the 8% owned Lamar Jackson, who has a lot of upside, who definitely gives you a lot of leverage against the field. I mean, if you're going into a single entry tournament, let's just say 500 people, 8% have Lamar Jackson. I mean, here's the thing. You're going to have a lot of leverage if Lamar Jackson continues to produce what he's producing in comparison to all the other quarterbacks. So I don't mind it. And I think people should not be scared to look there at least before making final decisions in their builds.
Yeah, I think that was said perfectly. I think that he's the type of guy who kind of breaks the rule of really everything when it comes to it. And if you can get him at this sort of a price tag, and it's similar to like McCaffrey when his ownership starts to come down, it's just a really good spot to be on him. So Lamar's there right now, and it's worth taking advantage of.
Let's talk about my favorite, the low owned guys that have huge upside. I love going down the list and just picking out these guys that no one wants to do with, like Lamar Jackson, but yet there's just so much great upside with them. So I guess we could look at like the sub 10% projected guys owned right now. But before we do, who are your guys that maybe you've seen throughout the week so far in your research that really stand out that could be great sleepers?
Yeah, so just moving over to the running back position, Le'Veon Bell's right at that price point or that ownership number of about 10%. I do like that. I like probably a little bit lower down. Aaron Jones is more of a tournament play. He's not going to pick up really much ownership at all. He's 6,800. He is overpriced, but what you're paying for there is you're just paying up to be different and be contrarian. I do like him in a really good spot where everybody's kind of intrigued by his other backfield running mate, who's the lesser in the backfield in Jamal Williams because of the lower price point. Nobody going to Aaron Jones. I think Jones and Le'Veon Bell's ownership probably comes up a little bit from what we're seeing, but I think they're both sort of lower end guys that have upside. And those are the two that stand out the most for me, just because on this slate, you have a lot of priced up guys who have been performing well lately, but now they're at a spot where I just really don't want to pay for them. I think Josh Jacobs, he's not super low owned, but 9.5 point underdog is really scary. But if he can establish himself sort of early on in this one, he did it on 12 carries, pretty much had 99 yards the first time he played this really bad Chiefs run defense. I'm not really prioritizing him, but I think that's a low owned guy who has the 150 rushing yard upside and a touchdown.
One guy I really like here is Aaron Rodgers. Aside from Lamar Jackson, I think both of these guys are two guys that have really big opportunities this week. I think Lamar Jackson is just way too talented in all facets of his game to not get there. And I'm very intrigued to see how this game really rolls out. But I think D.D. Westbrook, we talked about him before, hasn't really gotten there at times when we liked him in matchups, but this week, I feel like maybe the chemistry is there now, and maybe we'll see a lot more synergy between the two of him and Foles. So I don't mind him at 8.5%. If a lot of people are going to be going to Shark and Conley, typically what we see a lot of times is people who take down big tournaments, they always pivot to that wide receiver that no one's really on in that same game. And I feel like D.D. Westbrook could be that guy this week.
Yeah, I like to call him Westbrook. I also like Conley on the exact same team for similar sort of analysis. Upside as a guy who's not going to be highly owned as a Shark will be. I think all those guys are in great spots. Other guys who stand out right now, we'll see what happens with Sterling Shepard's ownership, but at lower ownership right now, and I imagine it comes in pretty low. He's going to move into the slot. He'll see 8+ targets in the slot. Tramon Williams for the Packers has been nice in the slot, but they haven't been running out a lot of man-to-man coverage there. So should be a spot where Sterling Shepard, with no Evan Ingram and a reluctancy to dump it off to Saquon, probably has the most upside in that Giants offense. And even if it does rain or there's concerns about weather, he's a slot wide receiver, so it should not affect his game really at all. If not, be maybe a little bit more benefactory for him because he knows where he's running his routes on the slippery field, whereas the defenders do not. So more sure footing. I think Sterling Shepard right now is a guy that I'll take a stronger stance on, and I expect the ownership to not really come up on it.
What do you feel about Nick Chubb? And I just say this because he's such a high volume guy, and it's a very big game this week at Pittsburgh. But he's 1.3% projected owned, and I'm not saying he's like a fantastic play. I'm not saying that he's going to go off or anything. But when I continue to look at it, and if he's someone that is going to continue to get this volume, 20 plus carries, getting touches in the backfield, getting those goal line carries as well in the red zone. 6 last week, 3 the week before that, 7 the week before that. Um, any love for Nick Chubb as just far as like a very, very outlier contrarian play?
Yeah, definitely. In the context of being really contrarian. I mean, we saw him play Pittsburgh, 2 weeks ago? He had a
Yeah.
season high in 27 rush attempts and didn't do much, but nobody does a lot against Pittsburgh on the ground. They're the number one rush defense. They've just been, or number right there, 1 and 2 with Denver. They keep flip flopping. But they've just been so good on the ground this year. It's really tough. The thing you have working for Nick Chubb is even though Kareem Hunt continues to be there, it's not really taking over all his snaps. They're playing on the field at the same time. Hunt operating as a slot wide receiver a lot. You do get Nick Chubb seeing all of the goal line responsibilities there. Seeing right now 16 more since Hunt has been activated for 3 weeks than Hunt has seen, which is just 2. So, yeah, I think that Nick Chubb at 8,100 or 7,800, if you're going to angle it as a guy who's just not owned, really difficult matchup. Probably don't get there, but if it's just a 1% flyer that you're getting 5 to 10% of to take a stance on it, you can do much worse than getting a probably top 5 running back in the league right now.
One more guy I want to talk to you about, and he's 7% right now. And if he does play, he's very low priced, man. 5,100. Going down to that Miami game, Alshon Jeffrey. Wentz has somewhat of a really good matchup this week, and they should excel this week. I mean, if they don't, I think we should just write off Carson Wentz because he is very turnover prone as of late. He's just not the same. He looks very confused in the pocket. His accuracy has been really off. I think a lot of people were upset last week because he overthrew Miles Sanders, who was wide open for like a 20-yard screen touchdown. But Alshon Jeffrey at 5,100, man. I mean, this is the go-to guy. Do you like him, or is it just Zach Ertz and Zach Ertz only in this passing offense?
Yeah, so I think Jeffrey's interesting. I think the role for Jeffrey this season though is just it's been abysmal. He won't have a big game for you unless he sees just really high receptions, which is not really a PPR type of guy. We saw it happen, I believe, once against Minnesota this year. He had like a 10 catch day, but he's just a chain mover and then a red zone body. So if Zach Ertz right now seems very questionable to actually suit up on Sunday, they're saying if he doesn't suit up, well, then I think Jeffrey just becomes the de facto red zone option right there with Goddard. If Ertz does suit up, it's just he's like the third option behind the tight ends in the red zone. So Jeffrey maybe seems like he's fully healthy now, which is good. But even before he had all these injuries, he's just been used as a guy who's not running down the field. He's just moving the chains. And at that point, even if he sees 8 targets, they're not these targets that are adding up for downfield targets. And on average, his targets are going for like 16, 20 yards. They're probably going for like 8 to 10 yards and moving the chains. So at the price point, it's nice, especially if you want to stack Carson Wentz. He's low owned right now in terms of Jeffrey. So it makes it more unique. But as sort of a one-off option, I probably just don't get there. I do like the fact that he's healthier, but I think the way that they utilize him in this offense has just been really poor.
One more guy, just to write off before we go over to the next topic is I really like Sam Darnold this week. I think the last 3 weeks he's really not only been effective, but has just for fantasy purposes been great. And he's got another great matchup. I mean, the slot wide receiver position has excelled against the Cincinnati Bengals secondary. So Jamison Crowder, 5,600. I like it. The only thing I haven't liked is Sam Darnold hasn't gone to him as much, I think, at the last game or two as what we've seen previously, with maybe guys getting back into the offense, guys who are healthy, like Demaryius Thomas, like Anderson, and guys who have stepped up, like Griffin in the tight end slot. But at 6.8%, Jamison Crowder, and if this offense continues to pass and accurately pass and get these guys these opportunities in the red zone, don't mind Jamison Crowder at all. Must-have plays. We've talked about top priorities. We've talked about low-owned guys, but clearly there's some guys that are must-haves. Guys that maybe we focus around a core. Maybe 2 or 3 guys that we're going to put in a lot of lineups because those are the guys that we feel will help us get to the promised land. For me, I really like CMC. This is a guy where he might be my must-have in both aspects, in cash game and tournaments, because of just how much upside he has, and it's hard to fade that much upside. But who are your must-have plays, Sal, for this week?
Yeah, right now it's one guy and potentially 2 depending on somebody's injury status, but it's Devontae Adams. It's really no like shocker for people. He's the highest owned player, but there's some weeks where guys highly owned and you don't want any. And there's been that week for me so far, Brian Hill weeks, Josh Jacobs week 2, and then there's some weeks where they look okay, but this is a week where Devontae Adams, I'm not shocked if he ends up being somewhere in the 40 to 50% of my lineups, if not more. It just doesn't get any better. There's nobody on this team that can guard him. The Packers are not huge favorites, 6-point favorites. You imagine Rodgers throws 30 times, 32 times. Whenever that happens, if Rodgers is going to throw 30 times, you say 1 to 2 of those are throwaways. Adams is going to see 10 targets. There's just no receivers on this team. They're not scheming for Aaron Jones in the passing game anymore. Tight ends are not used in this offense, sadly. So it's Adams to see 10 to 12 targets against a really bad secondary, which usually translates to around 3 red zone targets in the game. Those usually bank in for 1 score as long as they're there. So yeah, he's been needing touchdown regression, I guess you can say. Injury obviously holding him out a month to 5 weeks. Adams would be that guy. If you have no Zach Ertz, I think Dallas Goedert slowly becomes that guy at tight end for me. The issue is there, like nobody is even close for me really right now with Adams in terms of the wide receiver position. Darren Waller is another guy who kind of is close. So at tight end, maybe not must-haves, but depending on injuries, Dallas Goedert and then Darren Waller kind of right now is above the rest for me.
Man, I thought I never would hear Brian Hill's name again. I was shocked to hear that, man. That guy has really disappointed a lot of people, let me tell you. Prayers to all those people who have rostered him, because
I was hoping he would score just like a garbage touchdown on
oh,
Thanksgiving.
he can't even do that. Are you kidding me?
Not even for me, like just for like just how peak it would have been for everybody seeing it
Oh,
on Thanksgiving.
what I didn't see his ownership for the Thanksgiving slate, but was he owned anywhere?
I didn't see it either. I doubt he was. I just think it would have been like a really big troll for him to do that on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, right. Like he
As like the
scores,
third string in that game. Yeah.
he scores a touchdown when like everyone is not on him, just to like throw it in their face.
Yeah, with Devonta Freeman back. I don't even know if he touched the ball in the game. I guess I could look.
I think he did. I think he had a couple touches. I think I remember seeing that. Devontae Adams, I don't mind. Clearly, this passing offense. If I go Devontae Adams, though, I think I'm going to go a lot of Rodgers. This will be something I'll look at over the next 24 hours, but depending how ownership is and the fluctuations. But Clearly, this passing offense, I mean, it is Devontae Adams. And so if Adams is going to go off, and I think other wide receivers will step up in this game. I don't think, all the attention will be on Adams as far as all the volume. I think other guys will definitely produce because that's just how it is in fantasy, and that's what we'll see. So I wouldn't be surprised if like Scantling goes off or Lazard somehow goes off. I mean, that's just how it is sometimes. So I think I might be having a few shares of the Packers offense. There's no way I could see the Packers offense rolling another dud after what we saw in that game against the 49ers. So I like that call. I think CMC, man, I think this matchup is just really too good for him. I think the ownership is down to what maybe should be for CMC. I mean, regardless of price, this guy is just a machine. And it's just so hard not to put him in there. Cash game, I think for sure he's a lock. There's just no doubt about it. Multi-entering, I really like Lamar Jackson, man. I'm gonna roll with him. If people are so against him this week, this is just my take, but the guy is just way too talented. Running him naked, that's the type of option I got to roll with right now and figure that out. But I definitely want quite a few shares of him in multi-entering tournaments. If I'm maxing out the 150 in the Millionaire Maker, he's probably going to get a good 25% of the shares. And then other quarterbacks too. I mean, I want to target teams this week, Sal, that people really aren't on that have good matchups. I think that's just kind of how I've been pivoting as of late because everyone is so concentrated sometimes on these games. Like Tampa Bay Jacksonville doesn't appeal to me that much like it is the field. And that's just my opinion. Yes, there are some great matchups here. And I think DJ Shark is probably a really good play this week. And so I don't mind that. But to see like guys from the Tampa Bay side up there, like that kind of concerns me. And I don't know how I feel about that. And then the other game too is this Oakland KC game. I don't really know if Oakland can go in there and keep this somewhat competitive. I mean, Josh Jacobs is pretty high up there. Darren Waller's pretty high up there. And that kind of scares me. It really does. I just don't think they're that good. Yes, they've won some games and I can give them that credit. But I don't think going into Kansas City, they're going to be able to compete. And I think this is a huge must win for Kansas City. And this game, I don't think is going to be what maybe people are anticipating. And that's just kind of how I feel on it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree on the Josh Jacobs take too, just being a huge underdog. We saw it week 2 when he was chalky and like half the price, but just it doesn't work out when you don't catch balls. And Jalen Richard, like last week when they got down big, he's going to come on the field and catch 6 or 7 balls, and you're not going to get anything from Josh Jacobs there. So if you just look, it's similar to last week. There's not a lot of games that stand out with totals. You have Arizona and the Rams, which is why I have a lot of GPP interest in the. We'll see what happens with Kyler Murray, but on the Rams side of the ball, with Jared Goff and his receivers. That's one of the nicer totals on the slate, 25 teams, total 46.5. But a lot of these totals are in the low 40s, some of them in the 30s. So things that stand out as sort of spots where people probably aren't looking as much. We already talked about just Devontae Adams being highly owned, but nothing else there outside of Jamal Williams. I think that Packers stack stand out. That game in general is very appealing to me. Even if it does rain, I'm not too scared of getting away from it unless Vegas drops the total a ton. And then, yeah, that later game between Arizona and the Rams, not picking up all that much ownership. I like a lot of pieces in that. So those are two of the games that I think aren't getting a lot of attention right now, but have a lot of key pieces.
Dude, the same thing though in the Eagles game. Like there's no ownership or really no one talking about the Eagles. I mean, I don't even care about the 27.5 run imply 27.5 run imply total, which is pretty solid. It's one of the tops. But I mean, there's a lot of cheap plays in this game. Miami, you can throw all over them all day. And so once again, I'm going to go there. Like, I like the Eagles this week. I like Wentz, even though he's just been kind of atrocious with these turnovers over the last couple of weeks. But he's someone who can throw. And I mean, he does have weapons. Ertz, Alshon. And I mean, even if Aguilar is back this week, he's really cheap. He can be someone who can definitely go off in the slot. And I wouldn't be surprised against this Miami secondary that just can't stop the pass. So I like it. Why are people not on it? I'm not sure. Outside of Miles Sanders, no one's really to be found, but this team is projected to score a lot. And I think we're going to just go back to these last few weeks where, once again, the Browns last week, Browns, no one wanted a roster. But they were in a great spot at home against a really horrible secondary, and they took advantage of that. And so, but yet week after week, people just don't, for some reason, go to these areas that have a lot of upside that no one's really going to be on. And what happens? These teams end up being in the millionaire maker lineups.
Yeah, like the way that the content is in the industry right now, if you get these teams or if you just follow sort of what the chalkier stacks are and really all the advice is, it'll pay off some weeks. We saw it the week with Seattle and Tampa Bay. But for more times than not, it's going to pay off if you have over the field ownership on those last week, like the Brown stacks. And this week, a similar spot against the same team in Miami that the Browns are facing, like the Eagles you just mentioned. So getting to those stacks where it's not always going to work out the team in the most optimal spot. More times than not, it won't. It'll just work out higher than just trying to pick the random spots. But it's not always going to work out that those more favorable on paper teams are going to win it. And that's what happens. I mean, being contrarian makes a lot of sense. Having just options where you have a stable quarterback and a good matchup with clear pass catching options, you should always have some sort of percentage. If you enter a ton of lineups, you should have not just 4 quarterbacks in your pool. You should be going with like somewhere around like 8 to 12, if not more. Some people will run every single quarterback, but it just makes more sense because you're getting exposure to all of those games. And when you do stack it and you get their pass catchers, once that's the game, like last week Baker Mayfield, that takes off with Jarvis Landry and Nick Chubb. Well, now you have like 10 to 15 to 20 lineups depending on how many you enter with that combination when most people have like 1 to 2.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one thing to be a contrarian, but it's another thing to be a contrarian when you're playing good players and great matchups. And
Yep.
if you can do that, like that's an area where you can definitely see yourself thrive in this industry. Biggest fades, gotta talk about them, gotta pick them out. But do you have the biggest fade of the week for yourself, or multiple fades for that matter, for this slate?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go off of the ownership that we have right now here. A lot of it doesn't look terrible. If Jamal Williams, and I guess I'll go with both of these Williams running backs, if Jamal Williams ownership stays relatively anywhere above 15%, I probably won't get there. I actually have a lot of interest the more we talk about it and just throughout the week in Aaron Jones. I know he's surely priced up. He's not a bargain for you, but it's just a spot where everybody's down on this guy who's right there with McCaffrey leading the league in rushing touchdowns and a lot of upside. So I'll probably fade Jamal Williams. And then Jonathan Williams, ownership's not high. It's coming in around average right now, but this is a guy who's coming off of a 26 carry game. And that was a spot where after the game, they said Jordan Wilkins didn't get any touches because he was really being used in emergency only. Jordan Wilkins was getting like 6 to 8 touches a game when Marlon Mack was healthy. So it's not like Jonathan Williams is pushing Jordan Wilkins out of the rotation. I think more times than not, you get Jonathan Williams around 15 carries and just not a great game. And if 15% of the field's on him, I'll probably have 0.
All right. My biggest fade, I think, from what I'm seeing currently, I'm going to have to write off Philip Lindsay at 5K, 18.5% projected ownership, one of the top for DraftKings. And I'm going to say this because one, it's a split backfield. Two, with that, I mean, it really limits opportunities. Him and Freeman, it's kind of tough to say who gets what when they go into the red zone, who gets what because of a game script or third down, or there's a lot of variables there. And I'm just not going to go there. I'd rather pay up a little bit maybe for Miles Sanders or pay down a little bit for Jamal Williams. I could see that as well. But there's a lot of guys in that 5K running back range that I'd rather have over Philip Lindsay.
Yeah, I'll say one other name too. So pretty much Eric Ebron just like quit football, like he's just sitting out business decisions, he says. But Jack Doyle is getting like 17.5%. I imagine that holds, if not comes up more because he's only 3,300. I think he's fine in cash. But when you talk about GPPs, everybody's going to flock to it like he's surely underpriced. Like if this news was out earlier, Doyle might be like 3,800 or something. But he's not a slam dunk tight end. He's quality. He's been surviving on touchdowns this year, limited targets. Maybe he sees 6-7 targets in this game. But even then, he's pretty much like in terms of production, somewhere around below a Greg Olsen, maybe around like the Mike Gesicki range, maybe a little better than that. But if he's going to be 25% owned, yeah, I know he's cheap, but what is he, like $400 cheap? So you're paying for a subpar at best average tight end who's chalky in that situation, even though he should see more opportunity because no Ebron, I'm still probably just going to not get there as much in GPPs. It's a punt tight end at that point that is just overowned.
Isn't Everett out this week for the Rams?
Yeah, Everett's out.
Yeah, Tyler Higbee's 2,500.
Yeah, Tyler Higbee's a guy that, yeah, he hasn't been running a ton of routes, but we don't really know what the sample looks like with no Everett. We've had Noah Higbee this year with Everett in, and he ran a ton of routes. So,
But it's
yeah,
the
Higbee.
Cardinals too, man.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's going to be in a spot where more times than not, he probably sees like 5-6 targets in this game, probably closer to 5. But yeah, he's cheap. You're banking on a touchdown upside there. 3 catches for like 40 yards doesn't just destroy you either. So yeah, he's definitely in play at that price point.
But why is he 0.7% projected ownership?
I think it's just not updated. Like Everett,
Okay. I was
yeah,
gonna say like that's a home run right there. You mean a guy who probably is gonna have a few more snaps, a few more routes to be ran, a couple more opportunities against a team that has struggled mightily against the tight end position. With Everett out, I mean, he has kind of shot up in my model as far as the rating is concerned. So 2,500, I could see maybe a lot of people going to Higbee in cash now looking at it. But once again, if ownership isn't there, definitely someone to consider because, man, 2,500 really opens up a lot. Imagine if you went Dalton, Tate, and Higbee in cash, and then you just load up with like Adams,
can you?
McCaffrey, which I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these guys do.
Yeah, well, can you roster McCaffrey twice if that happens? So you
I
have like a
know,
double
right?
McCaffrey and running back.
Oh my God, it opens up so much. But I mean, hey, you never know. Going into the last topic, let me see what we have here. This week has been weird because we had one slate already. We had Thanksgiving. We had that hangover of all that food. I'm sure you had a great meal, Sal. And then we had Black Friday yesterday. So this week has been a little bit a lot of distractions, I guess you could say. So obviously we talk about changes throughout the week that we've made and up to this point 24 hours before lock, but any changes that you've made this week when looking at this slate?
Yeah, I would say definitely. So my interest in the Packers offense overall has just come up. Obviously, Adams we've talked about, but Aaron Jones is a guy is like a contrarian play. I mentioned him. I like a lot more. Aaron Rodgers, I think you could pair all three of them if you wanted, but I don't think you have to. And Aaron Rodgers is a guy that I've come on to a little bit more. And then the biggest change was really just injury related. It's probably Sterling Shepard having Golden Tate not playing. My interest went from really no interest in the beginning of the week, seeing that he was in the concussion protocol, Tate, to some middling interest in Shepard. And now Shepard's probably on a short list of like 6 or 7 receivers that I'll try and prioritize in most formats.
Once Dave Hanna in the chat, he gave us a super chat, said Devontae Adams going to break the slate. Appreciate you guys. Fire. Can he break the slate even though he's so high owned?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it, Dave. And then I think he can. Like, I mean, look, he hasn't had so he's like 35% on in the recent. I don't think he'll go higher than that. Maybe it'll be like 30% on at the end of it. Yeah, I mean, he hasn't had a blow up game yet because he hasn't been finding the end zone. But in this matchup, if you get a very standard Devontae Adams game of like 120 and a touchdown, if he's scoring 30 points, even at that high ownership, I guess it's not totally breaking the slate. But if 70% of the field doesn't have him, you're probably going to need him. He's just too cheap. Like he should be 8,000 this week.
Yeah. One change that I've made this week is to not be so concentrated on worrying about high ownership once again, and really just focusing on playing good plays, focusing on good matchups, not letting over-unders dictate my decision-making process because that will crush you in DFS. So if there's one, I guess, piece of advice I could say is don't look too deep into areas that don't need to be looked too deep into. And if you have a feeling or if players are kind of coming up in your model or you're seeing great matchups that maybe others aren't talking about, but you feel is good, don't hesitate. Don't be scared. Go with it. Roll with it. Because at the end of the day, it's up to the players to perform, not us. So, but if you guys want to go ahead and ask any remaining questions, once again, everyone in here, we appreciate you guys. If you can give us a thumbs up, go ahead and subscribe, like this, get notified because there's free content pouring in daily in all sports, all these great analysts, all these great guys breaking things down, taking time out of their day. And if you want to become part of Osmo.com, go to Osmo.com/NFL, promo code NFL strategy, get 50% off your first month. But yeah, that might be it, guys. If you guys want to go ahead and ask any questions, we'll go ahead and break anything down real quick. But besides that, then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. But Sal, any final words before we go ahead and get out of here?
Yeah, I'll say one. A couple of times I saw it in the chat and then just also been asked about it. Packers, and so the Packers game versus Giants, rainy weather, maybe some wind, and then Jacksonville game, maybe some wind. I would say just watch what the Vegas lines do before lock. Right now, nothing's changing all that much. So, like, rain does not affect football games unless it's a torrential, like some crazy downpour, and you rarely see that. You never see it. So, they wear gloves that they can catch anything with. So rain's not affecting the game. What will really affect, and if anything, it makes defenders not be able to be more sure-footed. What really affects the game is wind, and if you have crazy wind gusts, they come in just ever so rarely, and they only affect, studies show, 35+ yard passes. So for that Packers game, you're looking at like Darius Slayton maybe having like one of his plays impacted. So I wouldn't focus too much on the weather unless Vegas drops the total by like 6 points, and they haven't yet. So guys like Devontae Adams, Saquon, Sterling Shepard, all of their roles in that game are not going to be impacted by the wind or rain. So maybe game script goes to a couple more carries, but I'd be completely fine not worrying about the weather unless Vegas says that it's just going to be absolute downpouring and they drop the total like 8 points.
So who has a better defense, San Fran or the Patriots?
I would say so. Overall, better defense right now. I would say it's the that's so tough. I would say I'll go San Fran because of their defensive line. The Patriots right now have probably a better secondary, but San Fran's better against the run and has a better defensive line, and their secondary is like number 2 in the league.
And what's your take on this Kansas City Chiefs Raiders game? Seen a lot of talk about this over the last few minutes, but what is your overall prediction when it comes to this game?
Yeah, I mean, like actual outcomes, I think the Chiefs win pretty handily. I think it's similar to what we saw week 2, where the Chiefs just get up by 2 scores the whole game and then they don't let up. So in that type of area, what you want the most is, at least for me, based on the pricing on this slate, I think Sammy Watkins makes sense. His upside's capped since he's been in the slot since like week 2. But LaShawn McCoy, if you can get a running back below 5K who is going to project out for maybe 16 plus touches in the highest implied team total, that stands out a lot. So yeah, I think Mahomes, all those guys are in play because they always are. But LaShawn McCoy, Mahomes, Sammy Watkins, sort of a lower owned type of stack. That makes somewhat interesting to me.
And Sal, before we go, where can we find you, man? Where can everyone get more of Sal?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at SalVetryDFS. I'll be here over on Osmo next week on Tuesday, Thursday, and then this Saturday show at 11 a.m. talking NFL. Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. with Josh Engelman talking NBA. And then I have a YouTube channel, also an audio version of it, but you can check it out, just Sal Vetry on those platforms.
All right, guys. And for me on all platforms at Chris Randone. Chris Randone, search me. Other than that, guys, have a wonderful rest of your weekend. If you ate a lot of food, go work it off, go move that body, get the last minute research in, and make sure just play great players, look at great matchups, don't be scared. And Carson Wentz is my big prediction of who will be the quarterback in the top millionaire maker lineup this week. What about you, Sal?
All right, so if we're talking quarterbacks, I'll say Aaron Rodgers.
All right. Carson Wentz, Aaron Rodgers. You heard it here first, guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you guys for supporting us. This is Awesemo.com. Thank you to our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. All right, guys. Enjoy the rest of